Why school trains you to stay average. School teaches you how to follow instructions before it teaches you how to think independently. And that's not an accident. From the moment people enter the education system, they're rewarded for obedience. Sit still, memorize information, repeat approved answers, avoid mistakes, wait for permission. Very little attention is given to risk-taking, financial intelligence, negotiation, influence, or independent thought, the exact skills often associated with power and wealth later in life. Because schools were designed primarily to create stability inside society, not necessarily exceptional individuals who challenge systems. And the unsettling part, most people never realize how deeply that conditioning follows them into adulthood. If this video resonates with something you've quietly felt for years, subscribe and stay close. Because once you begin questioning the systems that shaped your thinking, you stop seeing the world the way average people do. Most people leave school believing intelligence means obedience. Follow the rules, complete the assignment, memorize the information, repeat the approved answer, and if you do that consistently enough, society promises you success. But the moment people enter the real world, many realize something uncomfortable. The people who dominate financially, socially, and politically often operate by completely different rules, because school trains people primarily for structure, while power rewards people who understand leverage. Think about the environment most students grow up inside. You are taught what to think more often than how to think. There's a correct answer, a correct method, a correct system, a correct path. Questioning too much is often treated as disruption instead of intelligence. And over time, many students unconsciously develop a dangerous habit, waiting for permission before taking action, permission to speak, permission to create, permission to lead, permission to take risks. That conditioning follows people long after graduation. It enters careers, relationships, financial decisions, personal identity. Many adults still subconsciously fear authority because they were trained for years to associate authority with survival. Good grades meant approval. Approval meant safety. Failure meant punishment or humiliation. And psychologically, that creates highly obedient behavior patterns. Now, this doesn't mean education itself is worthless. Knowledge matters, discipline matters, structure matters, but the system often rewards conformity more consistently than independent thinking. That's the real issue, because independent thinkers are harder to predict, and systems built around stability prefer predictability. Look at how schools measure intelligence, mostly through memorization, repetition, compliance, and standardized performance. But real-world influence often depends on completely different traits: communication, risk tolerance, creativity, negotiation, emotional control, strategic thinking, social awareness. Many financially successful individuals were not necessarily the best students, not because they lacked intelligence, because their thinking did not fit neatly inside rigid structures. School often punishes unconventional behavior early. The student who questions too much becomes difficult. The student who challenges systems becomes disruptive. The student who thinks differently becomes problematic. Meanwhile, obedient behavior gets rewarded consistently. And slowly, many people begin training themselves to suppress individuality in exchange for approval. That's how average thinking forms psychologically. Not through lack of potential, through conditioning. The system teaches people to fear mistakes publicly, but mistakes are often where power, innovation, and financial growth actually come from. Entrepreneurs fail repeatedly, investors lose money before learning mastery, leaders make controversial decisions, creators experiment constantly. But many school systems psychologically train people to avoid failure at all costs, and a person terrified of failure becomes easy to control, because fear creates hesitation. Hesitation destroys opportunity. This is also why so many intelligent people remain financially stuck later in life. They were trained to become excellent workers, not strategic owners, excellent at completing tasks, excellent at following systems, excellent at surviving inside structures built by other people, but rarely taught how to build systems themselves. Very few schools teach financial leverage, ownership, media influence, network building, negotiation, human psychology, or independent wealth creation deeply. And those are often the exact areas that shape real-world power, because society needs workers in large numbers. Not everyone is trained to think like architects of systems. That distinction matters. The average person graduates believing security comes from obedience. The powerful often understand security comes from leverage. And those two mindsets create entirely different lives over time. One waits for opportunities to be given. The other learns how to create them independently. That's why many people unconsciously remain trapped inside average lives, despite having far more potential than they were ever trained to recognize. The most powerful part of the system is that it rarely feels like control. While you're inside it, it feels normal. That's why most people never question it deeply. Wake up early, follow schedules, complete assignments, seek approval, compete for grades. Repeat the process for years. Eventually, that structure becomes psychological programming. People begin associating safety with obedience and uncertainty with danger. And once that mindset becomes deeply rooted, average thinking starts reproducing itself automatically. Because average thinking is predictable, predictable people choose familiar paths, avoid uncomfortable risks, depend on external validation, stay inside systems they secretly dislike because uncertainty feels psychologically threatening. That's why so many people remain stuck in careers they hate for decades. Not because they are incapable of more, because they were trained to prioritize stability over autonomy. And the system rewards the behavior. A person who follows instructions consistently becomes easier to manage, easier to employ, easier to predict. But independent thinkers operate differently. They question systems, challenge assumptions, take uncomfortable risks, co-create instead of only consuming, build instead of only obeying. And that mindset often creates tension with traditional structures. Because institutions built around conformity naturally struggle with individuals who think independently. Look carefully at how society reacts to unconventional people. At first, they are often criticized, mocked, doubted, labeled unrealistic, until they succeed. Then the exact same behavior suddenly becomes visionary. That pattern repeats constantly throughout history because people fear what disrupts familiarity, and school conditions people to seek familiarity psychologically, the safest answer, the approved answer, the accepted path. But real-world success often requires moving before approval exists, starting before certainty exists, thinking differently before validation arrives. That's why many highly educated individuals still struggle financially or emotionally. Education alone does not guarantee leverage. A person can memorize information for years, yet still fear risk, fear failure, fear judgment, fear independent thinking, and those fears quietly limit potential more than lack of intelligence ever could. Now, this doesn't mean rejecting education completely. That would be foolish. Knowledge is power when combined with awareness. The danger is unconscious conditioning, blindly accepting every system without questioning what it was actually designed to produce. Because once you begin asking different questions, you start seeing things differently. Why are financial skills barely taught deeply in most schools? Why is emotional intelligence often ignored? Why are negotiation, influence, media literacy, and psychological awareness rarely prioritized? The answer becomes uncomfortable. Modern systems often prepare people to function inside existing structures, not necessarily to escape them. And again, that does not require conspiracy. Systems naturally optimize for continuity, but continuity and individuality are not always aligned. That's why independent learning becomes so powerful. The moment someone starts studying outside institutional conditioning, their thinking changes. They stop viewing life only through the lens they were handed early. They begin understanding leverage, ownership, psychology, influence systems, power dynamics, and most importantly, they stop asking for permission to become more. Because truly dangerous individuals are rarely the loudest people in the room. Usually, they're the ones who learned how to think independently, while everyone else was trained to think collectively. That's the shift school rarely teaches. Not obedience, discernment, the ability to observe systems without becoming psychologically trapped inside them. And maybe that's the real difference between average people and exceptional ones. Exceptional people eventually realize they must educate themselves beyond the limits of the systems that originally shaped them. Because the moment you start thinking independently, you stop living automatically.